Before we do anything else, could you call roll?
Absolutely. Akwe-Badu. Here. Bernal. Absent. Kasuga. Absent. Erickson.
Here.
Fu.
Here.
Horn.
Here.
Jones. Absent. Phillips.
Here.
Roll's completed.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we have a little bit of business to take care of before we get to our hearings this morning. So I just wanted to take you through some things. But before I did that, I wanted to welcome you here to the Wright Institute, Berkeley, which has kindly allowed us to have our meeting here the last several years. It's a wonderful location, a wonderful facility, and a wonderful school. So we're very appreciative of the opportunity to be here. Also, I wanted to mention today we are going to, toward the end of the day, start discussing the question of the EPPP Part 2, or otherwise known as the Enhanced EPPP. That discussion, in all likelihood, will carry over into tomorrow. And that will be at some point later this afternoon after we get done with the closed sessions that relate, among other things, to the hearings that we're going to start this morning. So just to give you a little bit of a roadmap for the day. Are there any public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay. The one thing I failed to do was read our mission statement, so I'm going to jump in and do that right now. The Board of Psychology advances quality psychological services for Californians by ensuring ethical and legal practice and supporting the evolution of the profession. Okay, so moving on. I'll continue to talk. President's report. So if you'll go to the draft meeting calendar, that's probably where we should start. And I do want to get a sense from the board as to how they'd like to proceed in this regard. You'll see that there are 5 quarterly meetings listed there based on availability of board members. Here's the dilemma we're in, which I'm sure you guys are already cognizant of, having been here for prior board meetings. A lot of typically the first day of our board meetings is consumed by petition hearings. That seems to be the growing trend. In light of that fact, we don't always have the opportunity to get to all the agenda items that would be optimal for us to cover. So the suggestion from staff was one of 2 alternatives, both of which make some sense, although I have my preference. One of them would be to start the Los Angeles quarterly meeting, which is the April meeting? It'd be the spring meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so that'd be the spring meeting, to start that meeting one day early. So it would actually be a 3-day board meeting, but we would be able to get through a lot of the agenda items that have been getting clogged up in the system. The alternative is to do a 5th 2-day meeting or a 5th 1-day meeting. Unfortunately, we can't do this by telephone conference because of the nature of the petition hearings. And the reason that we were suggesting doing it in Los Angeles is because the majority of our petitioners tend to be from Southern California. So with that in mind, I'd be curious to hear what other board members have to say on that subject. Dr. Horn?
So we're really talking about adding a day to one meeting or adding a day somewhere else in the year? I vote for adding a day to an already existing meeting, just because it's very hard to get 8 people or 9 people and all their schedules plus staff and together for current, the meetings we have. So I think, anyway, that's my vote.
From staff's point of view, I think it would prevent them having to prepare for a 5th board meeting. I'm sure we all recognize the enormous amount of work that goes into preparing us for these board meetings. And as a result, I think it would be a little bit less wear and tear on the staff. So I would agree that I think that's the best approach.
Well, I was saying, would we be talking about a Wednesday or some other day that we could negotiate?
Well, it would either have to be a Wednesday or a Saturday. But from staff's point of view, working on a Saturday is not optimal. So in all likelihood, it's going to be a Wednesday. Is that it's a conflict with your job responsibilities?
But let me see if I could probably work it out.
Okay.
But if that,
Well, convenience is all relative. I don't know that it's convenient for anybody, but we need to do it. So, yeah.
I think a third day in April makes sense, so I'm in support of that.
I'm good with whatever decision we go with. Flexible on both. But definitely want to echo the less wear and tear on staff portion.
So it appears that the consensus is, and what we're going to proceed with, is adding an additional day to the April 2019 meeting, which would mean we would begin on April 24th and go through April 26th. Obviously, we'll look at the calendar to make sure that that's exactly how it's going to work, but and then the December 5 to 6 meeting would go away, which works really well with my social schedule. Okay, so some other items. Licensing committee. We have some licensing committee meetings coming up. I didn't realize we had quite that many coming up. I guess we're planned way ahead. That's what it is. Outreach and education still has, I'm confused now. Oh, those are the 2019 meetings. Okay. And the policy and advocacy committee meetings are there as well. There's been no change in board assignments, just so that the board members are aware. I'm cognizant that a lot of us are pulling double duty, and the double duty sometimes might involve us being on a committee that we're not quite as motivated about as we are as other committees. I'm very, very cognizant of that, and we'll do something about it as soon as we have kind of a closer to full complement of board members, so that we can kind of spread out the responsibilities some more. So I appreciate your patience with that process, and I think that's all I can say on that subject. Okay. The final item we have here is roles and responsibilities of the board president and vice president. And to presage what's going to happen tomorrow toward the end of the day, there is an agenda item where people will have the opportunity, if they wish to do so, to announce that their intention is to run for president or vice president. In anticipation of that, and also just to give the board a greater sense of what's involved in these responsibilities, we put together some materials. The first of which is in the combined board book. It'd be page 13, chapter 5 of our procedural manual or administrative manual.
Administrative procedure manual.
Oh, administrative procedure manual. Okay. So we've got chapter 5, shows the duties of the president and vice president. So obviously you preside at the meetings, at open and closed sessions. You try to make sure that you're following the time frames on the agenda, appoint chairpersons and define the responsibility of chairpersons, and make committee appointments. Assure that all board members adhere to all board policies. You guys are not difficult in that. We're a pretty good group from that point of view. Serve as a delegate or an alternate to the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, caveat if we can get travel approval, which has been, with the fiscal consciousness of California state government, which has been a very good thing, it has impaired our ability to as actively participate in ASPPB as we would like. Represent the board in communications relating to board action or policy, or designate another board member to do so. Approve or disapprove board members' travel other than regularly scheduled board meetings. And then there's, kind of some catch-all categories, responding to emergencies and urgent matters, which actually is can at times be a surprisingly large part of the job. Not that we're so emergency prone or there's so many disasters waiting. It's just some things are so time sensitive, you do end up having to respond in a very timely fashion. You really can't wait a couple days to answer board staff when they need an answer. Sign decisions and rulings. Serve as a liaison between the board and the Department of Consumer Affairs, Deputy Director of Board Relations, and serve as immediate supervisor of the executive officer. As the policy procedural administrative manual dictates, the vice president's job basically is to be the backup, is to kind of be to be the backup for the vice president or for the president, and to fulfill their duties or assume their duties if they're unable to serve for one reason or another, whether it's illness or need to leave the board or whatever. So that gives you kind of a general idea, I think, what's involved. I thought I would give you a little bit of a more specific idea so that people were a little bit more cognizant of, and I've just got to enlarge this page. My eyesight does not allow me to read something this small. Okay. So I kind of made a list of the different things that I've done over the course of the last 2.5 years, just to give people a sense of what's involved in the duty. I will tell you that, and looking at my hours for the last 1.5 years, I have 1 month where I worked 21 months. That was last month because it was a nice light month, which was really welcome. I've worked over 90 hours in other months. On average, I work between 40 and 50 hours a month. So it's like having another, at least a part-time job. And oftentimes, outside of patient care, Board of Psychology responsibilities come before my personal life, simply because there are things that need to be done. For instance, in disciplinary cases, when I have to sign an order, if I dilly-dally with the order, signing the order, and the vote's already been taken by the board on the enforcement case, that prevents the board from taking the necessary action to impose either the probation or suspension of license or whatever it is that comes out of it. So I just constructed a list of things that I do. In theory, I supervise with the EO, and in some regards I do, but I collaborate with the executive officer quite a bit. I have to look at her timesheets. I have to approve her expense reports. I have to approve her vacation requests. I'd say I spend probably a half an hour to an hour a week on average on the telephone with the executive officer, discussing things that are going on in the office, issues that are going to be coming up later on, preparation for meetings, what type of things we're anticipating for sunset review, and how we're addressing those issues now so that we can more satisfactorily respond to the legislature. I review and respond to emails. I spend about approximately half an hour a day doing that, in addition to my own job responsibilities. I review, revise, and sign letters to the legislature and to the governor's office. I review and revise these agendas before they go to Ms. Marks for final approval from legal. I review and execute orders. So every time we have an enforcement case, there's an order that comes along with it. So I receive a different package than you folks do, and that includes the order. So I have to sign the order and either get it in the mail right away or scan it and send it, which all of these things kind of cumulatively take a lot of time. I draft the president's column, which can be time-consuming at times, especially if my muse is not flowing with me. I review and revise the quarterly journal. So I read the whole journal at the end of the editing process to make sure that I don't have any additional comments as it relates to it. I interface with DCA in the governor's office, predominantly the governor's appointment unit. I have now recently been doing quarterly telephone calls with the Department of Consumer Affairs Board and Bureau Services regarding boards and bureaus and things that are happening. And that's usually, the meeting's usually led by the director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. I've prepared for and testified at legislative hearings. I chair the Sunset Review Committee. I have telephone calls with board members and staff, more than you would expect. I have board prep meetings in Sacramento, so every time we have one of these meetings, I have to fly up the week beforehand and spend a better part of a day meeting with the executive officer and then meeting with all of management and key members of staff to prepare for going through the agenda and to anticipate any discussions we might, anticipate any issues that might be coming up. So that's usually I fly out on a Thursday night and I fly back on a Friday night. So in the last week, Friday I was in Sacramento for the board prep meeting. On Monday I was in San Francisco for the meeting of the ASPPB, which is, for those of you that don't know, is the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards. So that ended up being an all-day affair, even though we were only there for 4.5 hours. And then, as you guys have had to, I've got Wednesday to Friday night in Berkeley. So basically I've had 2 work days this week. I also have to respond to emergencies and decide with the executive officer and staff how to handle those emergencies when and if they come up. So sometimes I need to call back right away again, this is not an honorary title. And I want to impress that on people so that they're not under the misimpression that it is an honorary title. It's a working job. And I know we have two former board presidents on sitting here right now, and I'm sure you're aware of how much time and energy you had to devote to it. And then I also sometimes, at kind of a supervisory level, get involved in personnel discussions. But that's kind of a representative sampling of what I might do in a month. So I anticipate for this month, for instance, I will probably have over 90 hours between the travel I've had to do for all these various meetings and the meetings. So that's basically half my work month. So I'm not saying that to say, oh, how wonderful I am. I assumed this post because I wanted to do it, and I find it it's one of the most meaningful things I've done in my career, so I'm not complaining. But I think there may be a misimpression that this is an honorary title and all you do is show up at the board meetings and go through the agenda, and that's not really the reality of the position. So please, as you think about whether you would like to run for president or vice president, please keep in mind that there are these variety of responsibilities you'll need to deal with. And staff would really likes having a president that's responsive to the inquiries that they make and so on and so forth. So I won't belabor that any further, but I did want to give you a sense of exactly what was involved in that. Okay, so with that in mind, item number 5 is the Executive Officer's Report.
Good morning. Included in your meeting packet is the Executive Officer Report. And I just wanted to add in that as far as the hires, we did have a new hire that I didn't note on here. We have a limited term office technician who's been doing a fantastic job going through, and our goal is to scan all the licensing files and put it into our Breeze database. So it's part of a larger data integrity project that we've been working on with fingerprints and license history, and education history in particular is something that she is putting in, because when that feature went live on our license verification part of our site, not everyone's education history was available. So we're having to pull out of archives the license files and make sure we have the accurate education history reflected for all of our licensees. So she's doing a yeoman's job of scanning the information and getting it in there and making sure all the information is accurate. So she's doing a great job there. And then as far as vacancies go, currently, we have a staff service analyst position in licensing, an associate government program analyst position in licensing, and an office technician position in enforcement. So those are all pending part of the HR process, and we're hoping to get those positions filled within the next 2 months. And any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
For public comment.
Any public comment? Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Zurich. So the next agenda item is a petition for the early termination of probation for Dr. Asandri. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. So we'll take a few-minute break just to reconnoiter and to readjust who's sitting where, but we will be starting that hearing very shortly. Back in session. I wanted to mention 2 things, both of them kind of housekeeping chores. One of them is to recognize that the Vice President of the Board, Ms. Brunel, has arrived, and so the minutes of the meeting should reflect accordingly. And the second was, if you see us staring at computer screens, we are not playing board games or Candy Crush or something like that. I don't know what games people play on here. I play solitaire, but we're looking actually. Board packages are now all online, so that we go into a more paper-light format. So we're not just staring off into space. We're actually doing the work of the board. And with that in mind, I will turn it over to our administrative law judge.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Phillips. Okay, good morning. I am opening the record in the matter of the petition for early termination. In the matter of the petition for early termination of probation of Maurizio Assandri. This case bears Office of Administrative Hearings case number 2018-070153. Today is August 16th, 2018, and we are at the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California. My name is Karen Reichman. I'm an administrative law judge from the Office of Administrative Hearings, and I have been assigned to sit with the Board of Psychology today, which has been convened, among other items, to hear this petition. I'm going to take appearances for the record, please.
Good morning, Brenda Reyes, Deputy Attorney General for the People.
Okay. Good morning, Ms. Reyes.
Yes, good morning, Maurizio Assandri, petitioner.
Okay. Good morning, Dr. Assandri. Since you're representing yourself at this hearing, I want to just give you a little brief overview of what to expect today. First, want to remind you that you have the burden of proof of establishing that your petition should be granted, that your probation should be terminated early. The Deputy Attorney General, Ms. Reyes, will be presenting some documents today, petition materials and attachments. And then you will have the opportunity to present whatever evidence you want to present today. If you've brought any additional exhibits or letters or anything like that that you want in front of the board, you may offer those into the record. You have the right to testify on your behalf, which is why you're here today. You'll have an opportunity to address the board, and then Ms. Reyes will have the opportunity to ask you any questions, and the board members will have the opportunity to ask you any questions that they want to ask in regards to this petition. You also have the right to call witnesses on your behalf. After the hearing, later today, the board is going to meet in a closed session, so there's going to be no decision today. The board's going to deliberate later today, and a written decision will be provided to you within a few weeks. Do you have any questions about the hearing process?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I understood.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Reyes, do you want to present the jurisdictional documents?
Yes, thank you. I do have an original packet, if I may, thank you, present to Mr. Gardner, who will give it to the board. The documents, would the board like me to identify the documents and address them
Yes, please.
individually? Okay. These are obviously Dr. Assandri's petition documents for the most part. I will go through those. The exhibit number 1 is the petition for early termination of probation. It's the packet. The individual items are identified on the list. The petition for early termination of probation. A narrative statement is at attachment 1B. Actually, all of these attachments in 1 are the petition. They are identified by A through F, but they are all encompassed in Exhibit 1. Again, the petition for early termination of probation, Dr. Assandri's narrative statement, the disciplinary action information sheet, the evidence of rehabilitation information sheet, proof of completion of continuing education certificates are at Exhibit 1E. And then Dr. Assandri has submitted some character letters, one from a Dr. Kathy Sink, and also one from a Dr. Munir, M-U-N-I-R, last name Sewani, S-E-W-A-N-I. And Dr. Assandri has also submitted performance appraisals from his current position with the state hospital at Patton. And he also has submitted some service awards. These are all, again, in Exhibit 1. This is the initial documents. I would also submit at this point, for jurisdictional purposes, the certificate of licensure, which is at Exhibit 2. And the notice of hearing, which is at Exhibit 3. And then I would also ask that the board take notice of the certified copy of the accusation, which is at Exhibit 7, the underlying accusation in this case, and also certified copy of the decision after reconsideration in this matter, which is at Exhibit 8.
Okay. Dr. Asandri, do you have any objection to any of these items?
No, I don't.
Okay. So Exhibits 1 through 8 will be admitted into the record. And Ms. Reyes, do you want to make any opening remarks?
Not necessarily, unless the board wishes. I think it's Dr. Asandri's petition, and he bears the burden. So I would, I think, leave it to him to present his case.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Reyes. Dr. Asandri, I'm going to ask you to stand and raise your hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that your testimony in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you very much. Please be seated and just state your name for the record.
Yes. First name is Maurizio, M-A-U-R-I-Z as in zebra, I-O. Last name is Assandri, A-S-S-A-N-D-R-I. Thank you, esteemed members of the board, Your Honor, and the Deputy Attorney General, for giving me the opportunity today to meet with you and to present the reasons and the justification why I believe my petitions for early termination should be at least looked into it and granted. The reason I'm here today is because I have professionally failed to follow important professional rules under Evidence Code 2960 and 2933, as I have failed to not allow myself to provide supervision to an unlicensed MFT in an area that was outside my expertise. And while doing that, of course, I have failed to make sure the proper notes and progress notes were done correctly in order to justify the treatment that was provided and in order to justify whether or not if the treatment was still needed. And that is the reason why I'm here. So how did I get myself in this mess, so to speak? I will briefly just indicate what happened that got me for what I did, and then, of course, address the board main concerns. You know, the board has the responsibility to protect the public, and also in this case it is my obligation to show to the board that I have been rehabilitated and that I have taken responsibility for what I have done and that I have taken the steps in order for this not to happen again. So how did I get myself in this situation? I've been licensed since 1990. My area of expertise is forensic, adult, psychiatric patients, and also juvenile group home patients. I have worked for 21 years with the San Bernardino Conditional Release Program, which is a mental health, forensic mental health program. And for the last 10 years, I have worked, and I'm working from Patton State Hospital as a psychologist. In addition to that, I have done numerous court-appointed evaluations in different legal areas, guilty by reason of insanity, competent sex offenders, and this is my expertise. And so what happened is briefly, about 4 or 5 years ago, I started doing some private work for an organizations, for a mental health organization, private mental health organizations, providing therapy and therapy to victims of the California victim of crime. And as part of my duty, I was providing individual therapy for few clients, 4 or 5 children. They were 8 or 9, 10 years old, and teenagers. And also I was providing supervision to an intern, an unlicensed person. We call her Miss Pat. And meeting with her once a week for an hour for supervision. One day in 2010, she came and said she was referred 3 children from the Los Angeles CPS. These 3 children who were removed from the parental cares due to domestic violence, parental inability to take for them, and the 3 children witnessed the hanging of their brother. That was what they were referred. And she said, oh, by the way, one of these 3 children is an 8-month-old baby. And I say, oh my God, do they want us to do babysitting? So at that time, I started provided supervision for her, and make sure that she was following the treatment, and the issue was pretty much attachment and being able to deal with the stress in the situation. So that is the situation where I find myself. Later on, they, as I said, the CALVAC indicated or filed complaint that either the sessions were not needed, or if they were needed, there were not as many as they're supposed to be. So that is the reason why I find myself in a situation, and it was proven that I should have acted differently as far as providing the supervision. First of all, it was out of the area of competence that I was since I never worked with any 8-month-old infant. Not too many people have, but that is another issue. And while doing that, I was not, I should have either referred the case, or I should have taken some specific implementation, such as doing further assessment and whether or not the child needed additional treatment. There was no accusations filed either against me in providing my own treatment, or even for the other children that or patient that Ms. M was providing treatment, and I was providing supervision. So that's the situation what I'm here. To the credit to the board and to the judge that presided over the case, they understood that. And actually, the condition of my being placed on probation, sorry about that, I work with forensics, so I know, was pretty much that I needed to obtain training in infant psychology and treatment. The first year was 48 hours, and then 24 hours every year, and follow probation rules. And I didn't have to do any psych evaluations or any supervisions of my case unless I choose to work with infants, and I was not allowed to work with infants 36 months or younger until I provided the training, which I did not do anyway. And so that was the reason why I was on probation. So, as I stated, one of the important issues for me to to show is that, first of all, yes, there's no question, it was my fault. I'm not trying to blame anybody else. It was my fault for allowing her either to continue the treatment or at least requesting supervisions or referring to somebody else. Whether or not the referral to somebody else was the best clinical steps, that is a different question. Probably the child would have not received any help to begin with because there was nobody else that was in a situation to provide that, and the Los Angeles Child Protective Service would have to find somebody else. But at least when the service was provided, I should have at least continued to do assessment in order to see whether the child needed additional treatment. So it was my responsibility, there's no question about that. Also was my responsibility for not being too careful in making sure that the notes are properly done. I work for the state, so I know that sometimes the paperwork is very hard to begin with, where it doesn't apply or doesn't fit for everybody, and I should have just made sure that every note was adequate and there was no mistake with that. How do I feel about that? Being guilty is an understatement. The last 4 years, I felt ashamed, embarrassed for what I did, professionally, of course. That I asked myself, how did I get in these situations? What has happened? As stated, I work for Patton State Hospital, and we have about 70 psychologists, and we have a meeting every month, and sometimes I was asking myself, oh my God, I hope they don't know what's going on with me, what I have done. I know people for so many years that are my professions. And so that is something that I had to deal with myself, soul searching, so to speak, to make sure that I am aware and professionally that this is what happened, and it's my responsibility to make sure it's not going to happen again. So that is, in some way, what has been going on with me. Now, what steps have I taken to make sure that this is not going to happen? Well, first of all, as the exhibits are showing, I have followed diligently the probation's requirement. Mr. Gardner probation progress report indicates that. I have done the 48 hours of training on the first year, and I continue to do that. Actually, already done the 24 hours for the third year, and I have also continued to have supervisions while I am at Patton State Hospital. They are aware of what has happened, that I was placed on probation, and when they found out that I was on probation, the chief of psychologist, the chief of medical director, which I am part, they look into it, and it was no problems that was not going to affect my job at the hospital, and it has not. In the same way, has not affected my ability to continue to work for the different courts in San Bernardino and Riverside. Now, as I said, the protection of the community is the most important thing. How has my misconduct affected the welfare of the child? In this case, there was no direct effect. The infant was placed in the foster care, received the help that it was going to receive in that sense. So there was no direct negative effect on the client. Similarly, the Los Angeles CPS never filed any complaint, against us. So I don't know even they knew about it. Similarly, the family was not affected. The child was removed from parental neglect and seriousness neglect. And so who really was the victim of these things was the taxpayers of California, all of us. In other words, because the services, according to, were not supposed to be provided. We met. There's no question that we did meet, and she did meet with with the child, all of these things. But whether or not Calvet asked for the money back to the Paladin, I don't know. I was not directly financially, involved in the case. I was just receiving the payment for my supervisions, and I was not receiving any payment for the services. So, as far as what are the steps that I need to do to make sure that these things is not going to happen? It's very simple. Don't work outside my area of expertise. I'm going to be 62 at the end of this year, November. I'm planning to retire from 32 years of civil service working for county and patent, and then I will continue to do what I have done for 30 years, which is psych evaluation, court order psych evaluations, and work with juvenile in group homes, as long as my boss, who is my wife for 25 years, who is here providing support for me, allows me to do that, so to speak. So, and that's very simple. So don't work outside the area of my expertise. If for any reasons you find yourself in situations where you have to deal with a case where it might be outside the area of my expertise, then I have to do the regular steps that are supposed to be there. First of all, deal with the if there's any crisis, deal with the crisis immediately. That's the most important thing. If not, then do the referral and make sure that the person receives the treatment. Otherwise, that's what it is. So I believe that I have proven, and I'm proving to the board and to Your Honor, that I have taken responsibility for what I have done, that I am aware of that. I should have not done that. I knew it. For whatever reasons, that happened. It's not that I didn't know that was outside area of expertise. I was thinking, well, the important thing is make sure that the child has help, and didn't think about the billing, didn't think about that those services were going to be billed, and so forth. And that is the situations, and I believe that I have taken the right steps to show to the board and to the people that I am professionally not a risk to provide any risk to the public. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Sandri. Ms. Race.
Thank you. Dr. Sandri, I am the Deputy Attorney General. I am here essentially representing the people to ensure that the board has all the relevant information in evaluating this, your petition. So I'm entitled to ask you some questions to flesh things out so that they can have a full understanding of your petition, yes. Okay, and your arguments. I really want to ask you about, you've taken responsibility and you've represented that you're taking responsibility, but what I don't understand, and I'd like you to explain to the board, you have acknowledged right here that you knew when you took on supervision of this intern, and that's who I will refer to as the intern, okay, during my examination. you knew that the treatment of an infant was outside your area of expertise, correct? At the time that you undertook to supervise the intern.
At the time, that didn't even come to my mind. And the reason is not because, the reason at that time, I knew that it was an area where I never worked with a 8-month-old infant. I knew that. There's no question about that. In that sense, I knew that this is not an area where I am familiar and I have the training. And I knew that, and I thought, actually we discussed with Pat that maybe I should not do this. We should refer it, and I knew that. However, at that time, and those were my mistakes, I was looking at the situation. Here they are, these 3 children referred by, by the CPS, and they have been going through horrible things. So I want to make sure that we do our best for the treatment of them and for the minor. I put my forensic hat, so to speak, and I didn't think about the billing. I didn't, because working in mental health and working at Patton, important thing is, when I did supervision, is provide a supervision rather than thinking about whether or not these services are really needed or not needed.
But doctor, do you understand how that is of concern, though, that you're saying that you knew that you didn't have the expertise in this area of treating infants, but you didn't think about it? So do you understand how this can be of concern to the board, not just in this situation, but another situation that may present itself to you in an area, again, outside your expertise? How can you give the board any confidence that you won't make the same kind of mistake? Can you explain to us why you didn't think about the fact that this was not your area of expertise or of competence? Can you explain why you did not think of that?
I didn't think about it because I believed that despite being outside my area of competency, I was able to provide still supervision to her in treating and the child, because I was thinking the main issues with the child was attachment and the horror of not being treated fairly by the parents. So in that sense was my mistake, and it was a miscalculation of my mistake, on my part. Now, what do I do to prove to the board that I will not find myself in that situation? As I stated, I know, and I have accepted the fact that it was a gross negligence mistake that I made, that I have, I'm aware of that I have taken the steps to provide treatment and to receive, not necessarily to receive training in that area, but it then is a choice for me to whether or not if I want to still be involved in that area. And my choice is that I will not be involved in any areas where I am not trained or don't have the training.
So what insight did you gain, though, in terms of your responsibility to assess and evaluate the client that's going to be treated? What insights have you gained to understand how it is that this significant oversight occurred? Because one of the things that's significant to me is this wasn't an isolated one-time treatment. This went on over a series of months. Right. And so I would also ask, was there any point over that period of time when you thought about the fact that, again, this is an infant being treated by essentially an inexperienced individual, and at any point during that treatment, did you consider that this was not really your expertise? You were unable to provide adequate supervision to this intern?
On a few occasions, yes, I did thought about that, and we discussed it with Pat about the possibility of referring him to somebody else. At that time, there was no other referral sources we had. Actually, I did talk to my supervisor at the agency, and then, as I stated, it was not followed because there was other cases that we were supervising, with her. She had about 10 different cases. So we were not only spending time with him, but also with the other cases we were supervising. So in that sense, it was definitely a miscalculations that I have failed to follow through.
Okay. You indicate on your CV, I think it is.
Yes.
I'm sorry, at page AGO 004 of the packet, you indicate where you're listing the additional places that you've practiced.
Oh, yes.
You indicate that you resigned from Paladine in November of 2016. What were the circumstances of your departure from Paladine?
I just decided that I did not want to be involved any longer in doing treatment for them. Maybe one of the issues that I was thinking for myself during that time is, and that might have had something to do with that, is maybe I had too much on my plate. My professional plate. I didn't want to be involved any longer into that. I wanted to be to focus on what I have done for many years, and just didn't want to.
Okay, so you voluntarily resigned.
Oh yes. Okay. Oh, absolutely.
Now, do you have any plans? Well, actually, let me ask you first. Are you currently supervising any interns or anyone?
No.
Okay. Do you have any plans in the future to supervise interns or psychological assistants?
No.
Okay. Now, you were required to submit to an educational review. Is that correct?
Yes,
As
correct.
part of your probation?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm looking at Exhibit 5, which is the educational review report by Dr. Carol Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I note that at page 72 in the exhibits, one of the things she discussed with you was the circumstances of your discipline and assisted you in developing plans for better risk management in the future. Was that true?
That's correct.
Okay. And she also suggested a book to you, Assessing and Managing Risk in Psychological Practice.
That's correct.
Did you end up obtaining that book?
I have the book. I don't have it with me.
Okay. And did you read that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay. And did you find anything insightful in that?
It's always important, and when you read those books, you become very paranoid because it really tells you all the different things that you need to be aware of. That it's and sometimes you don't even think about it, and you need to really be all. Update on the rules and regulations, and that are important, and if we don't, it's our responsibility to make sure that we do.
Okay. I'd like to go through the various terms of your probation.
Yes.
And just discuss the requirements. I'm essentially referring to the probation report that's begins at, or that's at Exhibit 4. Now, your patient population was restricted. You were prohibited from treating infants until you completed the 48 hours of coursework, and you've indicated that you did do that in the first year. Is that correct?
Yes, and I have not, even after having fulfilled the first year, 48 hours, I have not been involved in any treatment with any infant or even older than that.
Okay. And then we just discussed you had the educational review with Dr. Edwards, correct?
That's correct.
And that was, she indicates that was in November of 2015?
That's correct.
Okay. And you've indicated you've kept up with your coursework requirements annually?
Yes.
Okay. And you were required to complete an ethics course, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you have completed that?
Yes.
Okay. And was there any valuable or useful information that you obtained during the course of that coursework?
Yes, and that was with the APA, CPA conventions. That was about 2-3 years ago. And it was very useful because in addition to, of course, looking and considering all the difficult ethical situations that a person can find, also there was also it was very useful for me because one of the speakers was a person on probation who was willing to share his journey and how he was dealing with that. And at that time, I was just placed on probation, and that was very useful for me to know what I was going to go through.
Okay. And you have paid the cost recovery that was required, the $7,000, is that correct? And you have paid your probation monitoring costs on an annual basis?
That's correct.
Okay.
Every 3 months.
Okay. And if your petition were to be granted in this case, are you prepared to pay the prorated portion as determined by the board for the 2018 if your petition were to be granted?
Of course.
Okay. And you've submitted your quarterly reports timely?
Yes.
Okay, and you've complied with all the other conditions of your probation?
Yes.
Okay, now let me ask you, one of the issues that came out in this case as well was your failure to actually read the records that were prepared by the intern with regard to the treatment that was being provided to the infant. Can you tell us what you have learned since being on probation with regard to your duty to actually read the records of interns that you supervise?
I mean, there's no question that it's absolutely important, and it was my negligence of not reading all the records all the time. What we were doing was during the probation, during the supervision hours, was we were talking about different cases, and she was on occasion reading the progress note to me, to us, and discussing about. So that was happening. The failure was on my part in checking sometimes if the progress note were completely accurate and were completely appropriate. I'll give you an example. For the 3 kids, what was happening, she put a summary of the 3 children rather than only for one. And consequently, when you were reading the note, it looked like that it was not accurate for the 8 months old. So that should have been something that would have been easier to change had I been able to say, you need to put this specific for the child rather than a general for the 3 children.
Let me ask you, at the time that you were supervising the intern, did you know that it was your duty to actually review the records that the intern was preparing?
Yes, I knew that supposed to do it, and we were doing it by reading it rather. And my failure was not to be extremely accurate by one at a time. Okay, in that sense.
Okay. But can you explain, if you knew that it was your duty to actually read the records, can you explain why you did not at the time?
I think the reason why was because we were also focusing on other cases and spending more time in addressing the issues of the other cases than on this particular case. So therefore, it was a failure on looking at all the cases rather than a specific one or another one.
Then are you saying that it was a time management issue?
That it was.
And does
on my part.
Okay, and is it your view that difficulty in having the time to read the records excuses you from meeting that obligation?
No, it doesn't excuse me at all.
Okay.
It was my responsibility to have done that, and it should have been my responsibility to either spend more time or perhaps choose not to be involved.
Okay, and that's what I would ask you is, how would you treat this situation differently if you run into the same situation of time crunch, but yet you have an obligation and a duty to review the records of your interns?
That my responsibility would either to find a time or to decide that I'm not able to provide the adequate supervisions, and therefore either to refer to somebody else or to choose not to be involved.
Okay. I don't have any further questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Reyes. I'm now going to open the forum for the board members to ask questions that they might want to ask. So I'm going to start to my far right. Board member Akai Badu, do you have any questions for Dr. Asandri?
Good morning, Dr. Asandri. No, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Board member Horn.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr.
Good morning.
Asandri. I have a couple of questions for you. I want to take you back to a couple of comments you made as you were talking to us, and I have some questions about them. So, first of all, let me say I think it's great that you have worked in an agency like Patton State for pretty much your whole career and do that kind of work, because I know that it's an area where a lot of times we licensed psychologists don't participate, and that's one of the more difficult places I think for people to work. So I just want to
Thank you.
say that to you. But I do have a couple of questions about a couple of statements you made. So one of them, you talked about what you were disciplined for, and it wasn't for your own therapy. It was for really supervising outside of your area of competence. And but supervision is also an area of competence. And I want to ask you a little bit about the supervision that you conducted for this MFT intern. You talked about nobody being harmed, but I'm wondering what this MFT intern, who, in my opinion, and I think it sounds like from the board's opinion, got really inadequate supervision. That MFT intern was essentially taught that by a psychologist that about how to intervene in this therapeutic situation. And so, you I think you partly taught this MFT intern that it's okay to practice outside of your area of competence.
Okay.
I know you weren't practicing, but supervision is practice.
Absolutely. The issue of potential harm to the supervisee was an issue that was addressed during the hearing with the judge, and the records show that it was proven that I was not provided any harmful supervisions to the intern with regard to any other cases that we were supervising, and that the intern, she didn't have any complaint with regard to our meeting and our supervisions that I was providing with for her. The issue is specific to the treatment of this infant, and the reason why she was given the infant is because she was also an expert. She was also a teacher, an infant teacher at that time. So therefore, she had experience on that area. Yes, by allowing her to continue the treatment and not allowing her and not addressing, we did address, but not addressing possible referral. In this case, it was, in my part, a mistake that I have done, potentially harmful to her, as far as modeling to her that it's okay to work outside your area of competency. That is absolutely right. And in that sense, it is my responsibility for that, and I'm aware of that. Outside that area, there was no proof that our supervisory relationships with the other children or the other clients was harmful to her in that sense.
I understand that, and I understand that you probably you were supervising her for more than one case, I want to say, and that was part of your supervision. But yeah, it's that one piece, that she may have been competent in this area, she may have had training, but you didn't, and so
Yes.
part of your responsibility as a supervisor is as a role model.
Absolutely right.
So I want to also go back to the records. Now, I don't know, there may have been some specific kinds of ways that records are supposed to be written. I think people often write general notes, but it also sounds like there might have been some requirements by an outside agency that the services were being provided for, and so they had requirements about the information they needed. As a supervisor, again, one of your responsibilities is to make sure, again, this is your license in
Yes.
essence. I mean, you've seen that. So this is your license on the line, and the kind of to find out what was needed by the in this case or this particular agency, that didn't happen, and so I'm wondering about that.
You are absolutely right. I mean, and that was my fault, and I pay for it in that sense. And I'm sorry. That was my right. I mean, my fault, and was my responsibility. And in that sense, I pay for it, and I understand that. And
So did the intern, though, is partly what I'm saying to
yes.
you. That the intern also learned another thing from you, that
You're right.
you don't have to be careful about this kind of thing, potentially. And I get it was only one among several cases, but it's the one that you got put on probation for.
That's correct.
You know, and it was in your capacity as a supervisor of this beginning professional.
Yes.
So in that regard too, it's the modeling that you did for this person.
That's correct.
You know, that
And-
concerns me.
Yeah, and it concerned me, and I want to make sure that it's not going to happen. And as I stated, I have taken the responsibility, and I am taking the steps to make sure that it's not going to happen. Prior to that, I did provide supervisions for 20, almost 20 years to APA-approved psychology pre-doc and post-doctoral as part of working for the San Bernardino County Department of Mental Health under supervision of Dr. Abbey, who is now retired, and so that was never an issue or concern in that situation. And in that sense, it just, the way it happened, it's as I stated, it was my fault at placing myself on that situation where in a private practice there's less structure and less than working in an agency, and we know that. And therefore, you're absolutely right. It was my responsibility because my license was important to make sure that those steps were taken, rather than assuming that the same system that works in a civil service is the same as in the practice. That's absolutely right.
Did you take a course in supervision?
Before doing it, yes, I was taking a course in supervisions in order. Now I have chosen not to be in the supervision anymore because at that time I don't supervise. So I have not done the most recent one, but before, yes, I had them. And I'm scheduled to also be involved now in the new suicide prevention course. We already have scheduled in September to have that, which is going to be a requirement for the new license in 2 years from now. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Board Member Fu, do you have any questions?
I do, thank you. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Sandre. Just on average, out of curiosity, how many cases would your intern be overseeing at any given time?
At that time, she was probably about 8 to 10 cases.
Great. So let's just assume that I'm an intern of yours and I have between 8 to 10 cases. What would you do to prepare for our supervisorial meetings?
Well, what we do for her, she has to do, or for us?
For her, or in general, what would you do now with all the reflection that you've done in learning from this experience? What would you do to prepare for a meeting with your intern if you had one?
Yes.
And I know you've mentioned you're not going to, but if you had one, what would you be doing to prepare?
Well, first of all, I would be familiarized with the 8 or 10 cases that she is supervising, including be fully aware of the charts and the reason why they are in treatment. And I would also review the notes, the chart that we have, that she has. And then before supervision, I remember the issues prior to the other supervision, to the last supervision, and of course, if there was any concern that might have happened between the prior supervision to the current supervision, she had the ability to talk to me at any time she needed if there was any issue with regard to that. So those would be in order to be ready before the actual supervisor hour that we have. And then then during the hour is just an issue of how we structure the hour. The first thing would be to let's address any concern that it might have that needs to be addressed immediately. And after doing that, then of course we can look at was any concern from the prior supervision, and then we might then spend time from week to week in addressing a specific case and follow up a specific case. Of course, with the issue of providing feedback, keeping in mind issue of transfer and counter-transference that are important, and especially working with victims of crimes. They might have a very difficult issue with that. So that would be the way to do it, and in order to make sure that the supervisee received the training, and we might spend time also in addressing specific issues that are important, and then the process is also between the supervisor and the supervisee that is very important. I was saying the modeling is an important thing.
Great, thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Fu. Vice President Bernal, do you have any questions?
Just a couple. Good morning, Dr.
morning.
Sandri. I just wanted to compliment you on the reoccurring theme that I hear from you is that you take full responsibility and accountability, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Just a really quick question, though, and I believe I read this throughout the documents, was the intern also seeing the other siblings?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So it could have been, too, that you all were maybe just looking at it as a group, as a family?
Yeah, I mean, right, the other sibling, they were being seen, and there was no problem with the other siblings as far as any allegations.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Phillips, do you have any questions?
I do. Good morning. Dr. Sandri, as I understand it, the diagnosis in this case was separation anxiety. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then the course of treatment, by and large, for the last 30-some sessions was play therapy.
It was play therapy, but also it was also involvement with the foster care mother.
Okay.
She was working with both of them.
Was there anything in the chart that indicated that they were actually working on separation anxiety, other than the fact they were diagnosed at the outset?
Okay. I'm trying to remember. That was probably one of the concern with the charting that probably was not documented accordingly and properly, and that was one of the concern.
In fact, if I recall correctly, the primary thing that she was charting as she was going through the play therapy was whether the child was reaching their developmental milestones in the expected time and order.
That's correct.
So it doesn't really appear from the chart that she was treating separation anxiety.
That's correct.
Okay. With that in mind, I think you've said that the taxpayers were hurt,
Yes.
were harmed, and I think you now can see that the intern was hurt
Yes.
by the supervision you were giving.
Yes. And I stated that.
Okay. If, just assuming for a second that 8-month-old infant, or however old it was by the end of the service, didn't actually need the treatment that was being given. They were actually reaching their developmental milestones in the expected time and order. Do you think that infant might have been harmed?
In a sense that it would have been harm, in a sense that she would have been involved in a treatment that it was not necessary.
So for example, if you had a child and the doctor had them come in for 30 different appointments and the treatment was unnecessary, would you consider yourself to have been harmed or your child to have been harmed by going through unnecessary treatment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That was one of my concerns in both your testimony and in reading the paperwork.
Yes.
That you didn't seem to know that this had caused harm to the child, or potentially caused harm to the child, and to the foster family and biological parents.
Yeah, in that sense, you have a point. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not even really clear, is it, that the child necessarily recognized, at least on a conscious level,
Right.
that the sibling had killed himself by hanging.
Yes, of course, an 8-month-old baby would not be conscious of what happened in that sense. It doesn't have the intellectual, the ability to do that. Yes.
Right. I remember this case when it first came before us, and it was troubling at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, I guess I still find it troubling. But I do appreciate the fact that you've attempted to take full responsibility for your part in it, and that you have recognized that you're the responsible party.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Were there other people in that agency, just out of curiosity, that were trained in infant mental health?
Yeah, I don't know specifically. I know we had a lot of training. The agency was providing training for mental health. We did have training at the agency. Now, whether or not there was any other therapist that was going to be also in a position to provide that kind of training, that I don't know. As I stated, the 3 children were referred to her and to me at that time, and I was not the one that I chosen. Then, had they been referred to somebody else, I would have not been here.
Did you approach whoever it was that supervised your work to ask them whether there was someone with experience in infant mental health who could?
We talked about it at that time, but I don't think there was anybody else beside her that was in a position to provide any service, as far as I know.
And it sounds like her training had been more as a teacher than as a therapist.
Before becoming an intern, she was a preschool teacher too.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Erickson.
Good morning, Dr. A Z. Thank you for a nicely organized presentation. I found it easy to follow the history and the chronology, and also I think we're appreciative that you've attempted to take responsibility for, I'm appreciative of your efforts to do so for what happened. I have some questions. You took coursework in pediatric psychology?
Yes.
In reading through the various parts of your package for petitioning early termination of probation, I recall seeing something about playing and observing play with the child is not the same as play therapy. I'm wondering if you have now, in hindsight, knowledge or awareness of how the treatment might have been more appropriate, more robust, more tailored to this infant's needs, with the benefit of having taken that coursework that you've gone through.
Yes, absolutely correct. The course I've taken, also I have spent a lot of, and I'm still doing it, on neurorelational framework that right now is from Dr. Lilas, who really address with early infants and the difficulties that they have, especially due to neglect and abuse and so forth, and really looking from a neurological point of view, and in this case, at the early age, a lot of issues would be on the sensory development, in the regulation development, which because they are so young, which would be in the sensation, the perceptions, and so forth. And in that particular case, an approach would have been in order to address possible, the stress that it might have would be to really help the child in basic regulations such as sleep, such as being able to function for a child of that age. So the issue would have been not much even play therapy because it's too young, but really to help the child with soothing, with and instruct the foster parents to help in that sense, in order that he would be able to develop his basic function. That without those, he will not be able to develop the higher functioning level. So in that sense, it would have been a different approach that we would have had I been aware of the training that I have right now.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Erickson.
Excuse me. I just have one other question.
Okay, Board Member Akaibadu, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question, kind of a follow-up to the other questions. Can you hear me? I'm not.
You are
now. Now you can hear me? Yes. I just wanted to ask, how have you rectified the modeling with your supervisee, the person you supervised? How have you rectified what was done that you would do it differently with her in order to, okay.
Yes, well, what I rectified in a sense on that situation, what I should have done, it would have been at that time to say, I could have taken a drastic things to say, okay, I'm sorry, I cannot supervise you on this case. I cannot do that. I'm not in a situation to do that, and therefore let's immediately talk to the agency and refer this person to somebody else.
But my question is a little bit different. Since all of this has happened, and you have demonstrated insight into this, as you've noticed, you would take more time, you would read the case more, all of that you have done.
Okay.
Now this has happened. And as other board members have said, the modeling part of this, what have you done anything now based on your insight that you've gone back to the person you've supervised and said to her, worked with her, counseled with her, whatever you want to call it, to say what I did was wrong, it was a failure, or however you state it, and based on this information, I would do whatever you would do differently. Have you had that conversation with her?
No. I have not had any conversation with her for the last a couple of years. I mean, she is not, I don't know if she's still with the agency or not. She left the agency, so therefore I have not, when the accusations were issues, we had talked about it at that time with her, but there was no any other contact. Now, had I had now the opportunity to do that, of course, right now, I would have explained to her that my behavior, my actions were not appropriate, that I was not providing the proper supervision for that, and I would have ask her what else I need to do to make sure that to rectify my my misconduct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Asandri, do you have anything you want to add?
Nothing. I mean, beside what we talked about it, I am, as stated, I know what happened. I knew what I did, and I have taken the necessary actions to make sure that it's not going to happen. And I thank the board to have given me the opportunity to come and talk to that. If for whatever reasons the board believes that I still need to continue to do my probation, I'll do my probation. I mean, I have 2 years to go, a year and a half to go, and I will do that, and I will continue to do what I have done so far.
Okay. Ms. Reyes, do you want to make any final statement?
Is this closing?
Do you have, yes.
Dr. Asandri given an opportunity? I'm not sure if that was his
Yes.
closing.
Okay.
Okay. You feel comfortable that you said everything you need
Yes,
to say to the board
I feel
today?
comfortable, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Then I would like to comment in summary. I would agree with the board members who have acknowledged that Dr. Asandri has taken responsibility for what occurred in this case, but I find a lack of insight into how it all came about. And I find that a little concerning because it's not clear that Dr. Asandri will not make a similar mistake or failure to recognize his deficiency, because I believe what's been offered here is that he acknowledges he made a mistake, but at the same time he knew he was not qualified to supervise the intern, but I believe simply took it upon himself to do it because the referral had been made and the intern was assigned these 3 patients, 3 clients, 3 children to treat. But I have not heard Dr. Asandri really explain his thought process or the failure of a thought process with regard to the particular case of the intern, or rather of the infant. I have not heard him address what his thought process was or analysis to explain why he chose to go forward and supervise her, even though he knew at the time that he was not qualified to do that. And I find that concerning. I believe Dr. Asandri would not supervise again an intern who's treating an infant, but I'm not sure that another situation will, if another situation presented itself outside his scope of practice or expertise, I'm not clear that he would stop and analyze and make a conscious decision about whether or not to go forward. I have not heard that, and I'm also concerned somewhat with his comments with regard to the records that time management may have been the explanation for his failure to review the records. I don't think that's an excuse for a failure to meet your duty to actually read the records of an intern that you're supervising. Again, I think that there was not sufficient explanation for how that occurred, and that leaves me somewhat concerned with regard to his petition. I absolutely agree he's met his responsibilities. He's abided by the terms of his probation. I believe he's remorseful. I believe that's what he is communicating here. He certainly acknowledged his deficient conduct, but I haven't really heard a thorough explanation of how he got there. He said he took it upon himself, but he doesn't explain how it was that he made the decision, because it has to be a decision that's made to go forward. And I don't think that he's explained how he got to that decision to proceed with supervising someone that he didn't have the competence and the expertise to supervise. And that's what I think is left here. And I would submit it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Reyes. And it is your burden of proof, so I will let you have the last word.
Yes, can I address that?
Yes.
Especially what exactly the thought process that I went through in order to decide to continue to provide the supervision, especially for the infant. And the reason why I placed the referral of the 3 children into contest. They were removed from a horrible situation that was a very controversial issue in the Los Angeles CPS, because those children were removed before and placed back with the family, and this has happened. So at that time, my thinking process was, these children need the services. They were also placed in the same foster home, and despite the fact that I was believing that it was not an area of competence, I believe that not providing any service to the child, it was going also not to be positive for the child to do that. And therefore, I said, okay, let's do our best to make sure that this child is doing well in a foster home with the brothers, because also the meeting was also with the other brothers, and not to be not separated, but at least for him not to receive any treatment or any help whatsoever. So that was my reasoning for that time. Was that reasoning justifiable or not? But that was what I reasoned, the reason why I chose to continue to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sandri. And the matter is now submitted, and we're off the record for this petition hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a short break before we begin the next hearing.